Today, we're going to tackle a pretty radical idea, one that might just flip your whole understanding of what science is. We're not just talking about new gadgets or discoveries. We're asking what science is actually doing at its core. And the answer might be that it's not just searching for the world, it's building it.
You know, we all kind of have this built-in assumption that science is on this long, steady march forward, that with every passing year, we're getting a little bit closer to the capital T truth about the universe. But what if that's not the right picture at all? What if the goal isn't just to find reality, but to do something way more interesting?
I mean, if you look back, the history of science is, well, it's kind of like a graveyard for brilliant ideas. Geocentrism, phlogiston, the ether, these weren't just silly guesses. They were powerful, working scientific theories that explained the world for hundreds of years, until, of course, they didn't. This pattern is so reliable that philosophers actually have a name for it: pessimistic meta-induction. It's a fancy way of saying, if every great theory from the past turned out to be wrong, why should we think our current theories are any different? Kind of unsettling, right?
So this puts us in a really weird spot. It's science's big dilemma. On the one hand, science works like magic. I mean, it gives us smartphones, it cures diseases, it lets us fly to the moon. It's incredibly powerful. But on the other hand, its own history seems to scream that its deepest truths all have an expiration date. So how can something be so right, so effective, if its fundamental ideas are probably wrong?
Now, this paradox usually splits people into two camps. You've got Team Realist, who says science is like an explorer uncovering a map of a reality that's already there. And then you have Team Constructivist, who says science is more like an artist, building useful models that work for us but aren't necessarily true. It's a pretty old debate. But today, we're going to explore a third path, one that steps right around that argument and suggests something else entirely.
And to get our heads around this third way, we're going to do something a little strange. We're going to leave the world of physics and cosmology for a minute and borrow a concept from biology. We're going to look at an animal's private world to find a new way to think about our own.
The tool we need is a German word, Umwelt. Now, the literal translation is something like surrounding world, but its real meaning is way cooler than that. The Umwelt is the unique sensory bubble each animal lives in. It's the world as it appears to that specific creature, defined only by what it can sense and what it can do.
And to make this idea really click, we're going to use the classic example from the biologist who came up with the idea, Jakob von Uexküll. Let's consider the world of a tick.
Okay, really think about this for a second. The tick's entire reality, its whole universe, is built from just three signals. 1, the smell of butyric acid, which tells it a mammal is close. 2, a temperature of 37 degrees Celsius, which means it's landed on warm skin. And 3, the texture of hair, so it knows where to hang on. That's it. That's the whole show. Things like colors, sounds, planets, stars. For the tick, they aren't just invisible, they flat out don't exist. They're not part of its world.
So, a tick lives in this tiny, limited bubble. What on earth does that have to do with the Large Hadron Collider? Well, as it turns out, everything, because we're about to apply this idea of the Umwelt to science itself and see it as a kind of reality-generating machine.
But here's the absolute game changer. The tick is stuck in its little world forever. Its biology defines its reality. But humans, we're different. We are not stuck. We figured out how to hack our own Umwelt.
How do we do it? With technology. Our instruments, our telescopes, our microscopes, our particle accelerators, they're not just tools for looking at things. They are sensory prosthetics. They're extensions of our bodies that literally create new phenomenal worlds for us to live in. A radio telescope doesn't just show us a star, it makes a whole new layer of the cosmos real and accessible to us for the very first time.
This brings us to the big idea, the central metaphor for all of this. We can think of a scientific field as a system with two parts. You've got the hardware, that's the scientific Umwelt. It's all the physical stuff, the telescopes, the colliders, the labs. It's what lets us poke and prod the world. And then you have the software, what the philosopher Thomas Kuhn called the disciplinary matrix. That's all the theories, the models, the equations. It's the code that lets us make sense of what the hardware is telling us.
So if science isn't chasing some final truth, then what is the goal? The goal is to reach a state called historical operational robustness. Yeah, I know, it's a mouthful, but the idea is actually super intuitive. It's that perfect sweet spot when your hardware and your software are totally in sync. Your predictions work, your experiments are repeatable, your tech functions flawlessly. You haven't found ultimate reality, but you have achieved maximum power inside the world that you've built.
All right, theory is great, but let's get practical. How does this new way of thinking actually help us understand a real scientific puzzle? Well, let's use it to decode one of the biggest mysteries in physics today: dark matter.
The way we usually think about dark matter is pretty straightforward, right? It's some kind of weird, invisible stuff floating around out there. We think our hardware, our detectors and telescopes, just isn't good enough to see it yet. We're on a hunt for a missing object.
But the Umwelt view flips this completely on its head. It asks, what if dark matter isn't an object at all? What if it's a symptom? Think of it like a recurring error message that keeps popping up on your computer. That's dark matter. It's a signal that the data from our hardware, our observations of spinning galaxies, doesn't match our software, our theories of gravity. It's a sign that our current cosmic world is being stretched to its breaking point.
So from this perspective, dark matter is doing a really important job. It's acting as a provisional ontological substitute, which is just a very fancy way of saying it's a placeholder. It's a patch we invented to keep our current cosmological software from crashing. It lets the whole system keep running, to save the phenomena, even when it's facing data that really ought to break it.
Okay, so let's pull back from dark matter for a second and think about the big picture here. If science isn't a race to a finish line called the truth, but this never-ending process of building and rebuilding worlds, what does that actually mean for us?
Well, it really gets to the heart of it. What we call scientific truth isn't some perfect photograph of reality. It's the moment of maximum stability, that perfect sync between our tools and our theories. It's the peak performance we can get inside the world we've currently built.
And this totally changes how we think about something like a scientific revolution. You know, when Copernicus came along and said, the Earth goes around the sun, that wasn't just a better idea, it was much, much bigger than that.
It was a full-on migration to a completely new world. It meant building new hardware like telescopes and writing new software like new physics and math, and from inside that new Copernican world, the old world wasn't just wrong, it became nonsensical, basically uninhabitable. It was like trying to use a map of New York to navigate Tokyo.
So this perspective gives us a new kind of ethic for science. First, it demands humility, realizing that our most solid truths are local and temporary. Second, it calls for audacity, the courage to see that we are not just passive onlookers, but the active builders of our own reality. And finally, that means we have a profound responsibility, because if we build the worlds, we are accountable for what we build.
In the end, seeing science as world building isn't a criticism, it's an upgrade. It reveals science as maybe the most powerful, creative, and world-shaping force humanity has ever invented. And it leaves us with the biggest question of all. If our science is building the world of tomorrow, what kind of world are we choosing to build right now?